Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Yelp. 1 year into the pandemic, how local search trends show the path to recovery. My name is Lizzie, and I'm a Senior Account Manager for Localogy, and I will be your host for today's event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. To kick things off, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our senior analyst at Localogy, Charles Laughlin.
Thank you, Lizzie, and welcome everyone. Happy to have you all here. It's going to be a very interesting webinar today. I'm really excited to have with us Christina Ng, who is the Agency and Partner Marketing Manager for Yelp. And so she's going to walk us through some really interesting data, sort of looking back on what's happened over the course of the past year. So Christina, why don't you take us through it?
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm excited to be here with Localogy and the rest of the group today to talk all about Yelp and local search insights and what we can learn. So I'm going to dive right into it. First, I just wanted to take a step back and share, what Yelp is all about, because I think a lot of us come to discover this site because we're looking for a place to eat or we're trying to track down a friend's review. But the Yelp app and the Yelp website is definitely much more beyond just restaurants and reviews. Yelp is actually a far-ranging platform that's designed to connect people with great local businesses of all kinds and in all types of ways. To give you an idea of our scale and our reach, we have over 50 million people who are searching on Yelp every single month. So there are huge opportunities here for businesses, or if you're an agency, your clients, to reach this incredibly sizable audience. And when I speak about businesses, I truly mean every single type of business. So again, not just restaurants. There are millions of searches and page views every single month on our platform that you're seeing right here in front of you for all of these non-food related categories. So that includes, your home services, like your contractors, landscapers, plumbers, to retail, to hotels, to even doctors and lawyers. And that's just naming a few examples that you can see in front of you. And the reason I bring all this up to start is I really want to emphasize how precisely because of that scale of our audience and all of the consumer activity that's taking place on Yelp across all those relevant industries, we really are in a unique position, I think, to be able to anticipate and measure the health and direction of local economies at any given point in time. And this is all based purely on just the different forms of engagement we see on our site. So I'll take, an example. I think we can all agree that we've experienced quite a roller coaster of a year in 2020. And as we saw these major events of the pandemic taking place, we were also seeing kind of the immediate effects that were reflected on Yelp. So if you go back to the beginning, COVID-19 is declared a pandemic in March. We could gauge the impact that this is going to have by the extreme rate of businesses that were marking themselves closed in the following weeks thereafter. So we were seeing business closure rates at 2 to 4 times the typical rate. And then likewise, a couple months later, we see different areas begin implementing reopening criteria, which, expectedly boosted consumer confidence and increased the search activity on our site. So of course, now we know in retrospect that some of these staged reopenings across different states weren't always the smoothest. And interestingly, where there were peaks in consumer activity in certain regions on Yelp in May, we later saw spikes in COVID-19 cases in June. So it's really this interesting kind of cause and effect that we saw, again, taking place kind of before our eyes on our platform. And I think it all goes to show, especially during, this time, which was otherwise, full of unknowns and uncertainties, it's really helpful to be able to dig into these insights that are available and accessible to us and keep our fingers to the pulse. I know at Yelp, it really has helped allow us to understand how the local economic climate is evolving, and be able to track what courses of action that businesses can take to adapt and survive. And, like today, be able to share that out with all of you to leverage. So again, taking it back to the start, March 2020, the World Health Organization declares COVID-19 a pandemic. Stay-at-home orders are put into place, and almost overnight, we were seeing businesses completely shut down across the country. And these were numbering in the hundreds of thousands just by April of 2020. And as with any major event in a society, this disruption came with critical changes in consumer behavior as well that you'll see had direct implications for local businesses. So even something as simple as the language we all use to describe our interactions with businesses were, hugely altered. We were seeing on Yelp the triple, sometimes quadruple digit % increases in the amount of times that terms like contactless and curbside pickup, temperature checks are being used in reviews. All these terms that are so ingrained in us now, but when you think about it, these were just introduced into our lexicon about a year ago. And I'm sure many of us hope we never see these terms again, but for now, this is our reality. But we were seeing this again all take place in Yelp reviews.
Hey, Christina, just a quick question. I'm curious, you sort of just mentioned we hope we'll never see these again. Are you already starting to see like a big decline in the use of these terms?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a decline yet. I think at the moment we're in this kind of interesting gray zone where some regions are going, full steam ahead with reopening, others are being a bit more conservative. And in some cases, it's kind of like a business by business case where some owners, like even if their local government has given the green light to lift restrictions, they're still playing it quite safe for their own comfort, for the safety of their staff and for their customers. And I think until we're, completely out of the woods here, I think there's always going to be a small portion of consumers during this time who are concerned with health and safety, and they'll still be seeking out those options to transact that work for them. And so I think on the flip side, businesses will continue making sure that they're catering to that portion of the audience with some of these options. Until that point, again, we're hopeful that they'll no longer be needed or demanded. But yeah, we're not seeing a huge downtick in this, and I think we'll still kind of see some of these terms show up for a while until we're, again, like completely out of this period.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, good question. And I mean, again, this all goes back to what I was saying, all these changes that are happening, what they really mean is that businesses have to figure out ways to adapt and ways to pivot quickly if they're going to survive. And that adaptation, it could mean different things to different locations. So in some cases, sometimes it just takes some self-reflection and introspection to know that the smart move could be to completely close until things settle down. In other cases, we did see business owners who were able to get creative and get resourceful with shifting their service offerings or the method of their service, or even sometimes their physical location, whether they were moving from in-person to more of an online or remote model. But whatever the changes that were made, what the most successful businesses had in common were their very clear and frequent communication with consumers. I think we all know it was a confusing time for everyone, and I would argue it still is in some ways, but half the battle is just figuring out what's going on with this business, what am I able to do, what can I safely do? And we were seeing kind of in the first couple months of the pandemic that business owners were using their Yelp listings to actually detail some of these changes for their consumers. So if they change their business hours or their operations or their protocols, they were, finding ways to communicate that out to people who are searching for that information. So on the Yelp side, we made sure that there were solutions on our app and our website just to make that channel of communication flow even faster and more seamlessly. So we saw a lot of these features adopted really quickly and widely across the platform. Things like business highlights So these are little gems or icons that appear in search listings and on your business page that are actually specific to the pandemic. So it could be something like, this business is offering virtual consultations during COVID-19, or they're open for delivery. And there's also now, if you search for any business on Yelp, a standard banner that appears front and center on that page that's dedicated specifically for updates related to COVID-19. And if you are a business and your page is claimed, or if you're an agency and your client has their page claimed, all these areas are customizable. So you could take that banner and demonstrate, specific services that you're offering, specific safety measures that you're adopting, anything, specific in your own voice that you want to communicate out to consumers. So these are features that have been really, really helpful for businesses during this time. And one thing I wanted to quickly, note here is that, we're going through a lot of turmoil, especially at the beginning. But one positive piece that we did see, because, it's so easy as businesses or as agencies to think of what we're doing as purely transactional and just kind of doing the next thing to keep our heads above water. But one huge learning we can take away from weathering this pandemic is just to remember the human element in what we do. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people, and on the business side, we should be trying to provide the best service we can to, our fellow human beings, because we did see that recognized and very much appreciated on Yelp. So, case in point, businesses were innovating really quickly to keep themselves open, and they were trying out all these new different ways to help their customers. And we saw a marked increase in positive sentiment, expressing thanks in user reviews, as these innovations were getting out there. And people are just so effusive with their gratitude, and just, thankful that businesses were even trying to help them out during what was very, very much a confusing time for everyone. So I always like to highlight that as, one consumer centric bright spot during this. But of course, just to be realistic, despite everyone's best efforts, we did see some businesses fare better than others, which, is certainly to be expected given the nature of different industries, and especially given any, abrupt change in consumer trends, which we definitely saw. So while there were businesses that, are typically centered around, typically communal activities like eating out and shopping, those businesses did take a bigger hit. There were also some, positive spots, again, particularly in the services industries, which I'll be going into a little deeper depth in the next couple minutes. But on that side of the business, we did see, businesses closing at far lower rates than other industries, and therefore they were set up to recover even more quickly. So just to clarify what you're seeing on this chart, under these categories is, a number of boxes, each of which represents one business that has closed per 1,000 total businesses through September of 2020. So on the left side, you see these service-based categories. We're seeing less than 10 businesses closed per 1,000, whereas more on the restaurant and retail side, we were seeing figures higher than that. But I will say the good news is I think it appears that we are on a horizon of sorts now, especially we're seeing vaccine distribution continue moving along. Consumers are getting their stimulus checks. States are in the process of reopening. All definitely really positive, optimistic signs of the economy getting back on track, doing it safely and effectively, and just shining that much awaited light at the end of the tunnel. So through, the Yelp data, we're starting to see this in business reopenings as measured on our platform. And these have actually been the highest over this past quarter than they've been over the past year. So I think that's especially reassuring as we continue moving forward in 2021. And in fact, over the past year, over 500,000 brand new businesses have actually opened for the first time. So this is, again, building on the beginnings of this trend that I mentioned a few minutes ago. A lot of that is actually being driven by this services boom that we're seeing taking place. With over 270,000 new services businesses opening in the past year, which exceeds, that volume exceeds even what we were seeing before the pandemic.
Hey, Christina, a few seconds ago, you showed those headlines, and it made me think, there's a lot of talk, well, it's not just talk, there's announcements that, come July, I forget if it's July 1st or whatever, but, major cities are announcing, formally reopening, complete or almost complete reopenings. How are you anticipating that will impact everything you do, traffic, ad buys, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're reading the same headlines, and like you and like probably everyone on the call, we're also very hopeful and anticipating that there will be a surge in consumer and business activity as those, quote, back to normal reopenings occur. And one thing we're doing kind of in advance of that is similar to, this call today. We're sharing the insights we do know with our business and our agency partners so that they can see the light as well. I think one thing we're trying to overcome is there's always been a huge opportunity on Yelp for businesses to connect with and attract consumers. It did shift a little bit during the pandemic. So in response to that, we saw businesses, think we've got to pause our campaign. There's no point in, using this as a advertising or communication channel until they got their bearings. But especially as we see this activity returning and expecting it to return back to, quote, normal levels, I think it's even more important for businesses to make sure they're using all the channels at their disposal to stay top of mind with consumers, especially when those people are going to be really eager to patronize anyone who's open and available to them. So again, we're just trying to get ahead of it, making sure all these insights get into the hands of business owners and make sure everyone's aware that, as things reopening, now's your chance to kind of like get back in there, get ramped up again, and make sure you're meeting consumers where they are. Great. So yeah, like I was saying, with the services boom, that's driving a lot of the new business openings that we saw in the past year. Even in just the past quarter, they were seeing, up to 80,000 business openings. So across, these types of industries, professional services, auto, home services, local services. And again, these are up from, the first quarter in 2020 and, even up more significantly from the first quarter in 2019. So we are, far surpassing what we were seeing before all this went down as well. And I would say, actually, this trend, it isn't coming out of nowhere. I think it actually makes a lot of sense. I get a lot of questions from businesses and people who are curious as to, why are we seeing this now? But if you think about it, over the past year, consumers have spent more time than ever in their homes, and they're finally getting around to improving them. We're seeing this in consumer interest on Yelp for services like, decluttering and junk removal, electricians, handymen. All of these categories were up over 100%, across the country.
Hey, Christina, I have a question here, and there's no question, the services are booming, but one of the challenges they face, and this is more, there's probably data on it, but I've certainly heard a lot of anecdotal on this, is that they can't hire people. There's just not enough qualified labor for a lot of, particularly more skilled trades. And and I'm wondering if this is being reflected in any way in how they're responding to, solicitations to buy ads to promote their business. If I'm not going to promote my business if I can't keep up with the leads I already have. I mean, that's a sort of a tried and true objection from service pros during seasonality, right? But what are you seeing now with this just intense uptick in services?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely want to acknowledge that's a very real problem that these service providers do have. I would argue that's kind of an amazing problem to have like too many leads to handle. So that's good. But generally speaking, I mean, we talk to service businesses all the time, and kind of the resounding objective that they have is they're just looking for more quality leads. And I think even when they're getting super high volumes, especially across potentially other channels that are casting, wider of a net, more broader of a net, so they're getting customers who maybe aren't quite, the best fit for that business. So they're just outside their service area, or maybe that person was looking for a service that's like not quite the business's bread and butter. In contrast, what we're able to demonstrate and show on Yelp is that our targeting abilities are, very tailored, very specific, very flexible, so that they can ensure that any prospective customers who finds them through Yelp is like looking exactly for that business and what they provide. And they do have the money in hand and are ready to spend it with them as soon as they make contact. So especially now, as we're seeing this boom or this surge, I find that they're finding it more worthwhile to service those leads coming specifically from Yelp because they are so high quality, and they're willing to kind of manage the volume on our end in whatever way, or on their end in whatever way makes sense, because they're like, this lead is worth more to me than maybe a lead that comes from elsewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I mean, I don't see this trend dying down anytime soon. I think as things are reopening, the expectation might be like, oh yeah, people are going to go out, they're going to leave their homes, so there might not be as much demand for home and local services anymore. But we're seeing on the consumer side, they're also really excited just to have people over and like have these get-togethers that they were missing out on when everyone was kind of quarantined by themselves. So even while these reopenings are happening in stages, I think we can continue to see, searches for home and local services and improvement on the rise. Yeah, so I'm, coming to a close here today, but I think what I really wanted everyone to take away today is that herein lies a really big kind of goldmine opportunity for businesses on Yelp right now, especially if you're following these local search trends, if you're informing yourself or your clients, if you're an agency, you can really figure out where to invest and where you're seeing that growth. So like, again, take this services boom. As that rises, we continue to actually see more advertising dollars on Yelp spent toward those categories, as opposed to where you might expect, like restaurants or retail. So we're already seeing businesses seize this chance to get themselves in front of the consumers who have a need for them. And that's something that I think everyone on this call can also take advantage of. And one thing I'll point out too, since I know there are a number of marketing agencies with us today, or perhaps you're a business who works with an agency, is that Yelp actually has an agency partnership program where we collaborate with digital marketing firms, advertising agencies, anyone who provides, search advertising or digital marketing services to support their local business accounts. So we make sure that all this data and insight, such as everything I've shared today, get in their hands really quickly so that they can effectively support their clients. And not to say that any of this data is hidden or not, publicly available out there, because it definitely is, but we make sure it's just very readily at our partners' disposal, because we do work so closely with them in this program, and they are seeing that payoff. So with, the services ad revenue, we see this trend actually further magnified with the accounts that our agent partners are managing. And I think that most of that is due to because they have so much dedicated support from Yelp and quick insight to the insights they need to act fast. So if that's something that interests you, if you're an agency on the call or you work with one, our partner program is growing, and we're always looking to collaborate with more agencies. The current partners in our program have seen, great success from understanding and leveraging kind of everything I talked about today, from the scale of the Yelp audience, remember those 50 million unique visitors each month who are searching for a business. Even though most of those searches we see are actually unbranded, meaning they're not exactly sure who to work with yet, but they certainly intend to spend money as soon as they find the right one. 97% of people make a purchase after visiting Yelp, and that purchase could be with your business or with your client, so long as you can get in front of them at the right time. And we actually offer a lot of agency-specific benefits to members of our partner program. So like dedicated support and resources. This means there's a unique account team who will actually, we like to say they sit on the same side of the table as you. They'll co-sell with you if you want. They'll provide you with custom training, custom pitches, even promotions that are exclusive to partners that you can actually pass on to your clients. But ultimately, our goal are the same as your goals. Like, we want to make sure you're getting the leads that matter the most to you and your clients, and that will have a direct impact on your business's revenue. So I definitely encourage you to reach out to learn more about this program if you're interested in joining. If you end up participating, we're actually currently offering 10% commission on any and all deals you close for the first 6 months of being a Yelp partner. And then there's plenty of room to grow from there as part of our partner reward structure. So I would definitely say don't miss out on this opportunity. I'm personally happy to speak with any of you or refer anyone on the call today to the right team to get more information on this. My email address is really easy. It's cng@yelp.com, and I'll make sure it's going to be on a slide coming up soon, but feel free to email me with any questions you have about the partner program specifically. But I also wanted to open it up if there are any specific questions about the presentation today, any of the data I went over. I think there's just a lot we can learn from this period, about the period itself, and moving forward, how to anticipate trends better in ways that benefit our businesses.
Great, Chris. We have a handful of questions that are rolling in. A couple related to the partner program. I'm going to sort of consolidate them into one question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
One is is it just digital agencies, or do you work with other types of partners? And then the second half of that is are there sort of a minimum, you have to be a minimum size or any minimum requirements to be in the partner program?
Definitely. Yeah, good questions. In terms of the types of partners, I mean, we work with agencies and companies of all different types, all different shapes and sizes. The only, requisite is that, you're interested in, your clients, maximizing their presence and exposure on Yelp. We can help with any of that. So even within our current program, we're working with one-person shops. We're working with, some teams that have, hundreds of employees, all different business models all across the country. So yeah, there's no one size fits all. We definitely, make sure we have solutions that work for you and what you're offering to your clients. And then in terms of like minimum requirements, really to earn like official partnership status, we only require that you onboard at least one client into a Yelp Ads program. And then from there, we do have quarterly revenue targets for our partners that will unlock like various benefits. Like you might be eligible to participate in a product pilot, or we have like a partner council board that you might be invited to take part of. But the most lucrative benefit, of course, is an increasing % of commission as that quarterly revenue grows larger. So that's where each partner's dedicated account team is really valuable, because they will work really closely with you to make sure that you're making progress toward those targets.
Okay, now more sort of on the substance of the presentation. One is, I mean, a lot of talk about local services and a decent amount of talk about restaurants, how restaurants, the new business formations were a little below last year, pre-pandemic levels, but certainly not. There's certainly new startup activity. What are you seeing? Could you talk a little bit about retail, sort of how retail is coming out of the pandemic compared to restaurants? Because those are two are seen as like the ones that took it the hardest, through the pandemic. And restaurants seem poised for a recovery, but if you would agree, and how do you see retail? Is retail going to be slower out of this, or what's Yelp seeing? What is the data telling you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to pull some exact data points after this and share out if people are interested. But I would say just directionally, Retail, I think, was already set up to be able to adapt, a little bit more quickly than restaurants, where, at least part of the like shopping model has kind of this e-commerce, um, concept built in. So it's not like something completely new to go from like a restaurant, offering meals to in-person guests to now like delivering groceries and meal kits. Like that's quite a hard pivot. Whereas
Right.
for retail and shopping, there it already exists, kind of like the operations of like, okay, something that you would buy in store, now we're just going to get it to you through delivery and like set up some online ordering system. So I think a lot of the pieces were in place there already. It was just a matter of these business owners figuring out how to adapt it to their specific business. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think the same thing too, like as we go into this reopening period, I think it remains to be seen, like if it's going to be a dramatic, return to in-store
Mhm.
shopping, or if it might be slower going. But, definitely I think it's poised for recovery. It was already poised for, really good adaptation. So I think they're just going to be set up for coming back, same as restaurants and other industries.
Okay. Here's another question. So you kind of acknowledged this at the beginning, indirectly, that Yelp's known for restaurants and dining and entertainment, and the perception is that that's the bulk of your revenue. And could you talk about how the pandemic has changed the mix of advertisers, et cetera, for Yelp on has it reset it permanently, or is it still largely a restaurant dining thing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting how you say like the presumption is that most of our revenue comes from restaurants, even before the pandemic. But it's actually interesting. The general mix has actually been consistent even
Mhm.
throughout this period. So even before March of last year, on a monthly basis, our ad revenue from restaurants was actually pretty steady at maybe like 10 to 12% of the total. And again, like revenue from services was actually also stable around, I would say like 30% or so. So during the pandemic, that dynamic just got a little bit more dramatic. So there's a little bit more shifting towards services, a little less toward restaurants. Um, yeah, and to your point, like that is a presumption, but this is actually not a brand new trend. It's actually a message we've tried to evangelize a lot, because it's a bit counter to how most people think about Yelp. We tend to try and spread the word that people come to Yelp for the food, but they stay for the service. That's kind of like our motto. But
Mhm.
on the advertiser side, we always run into this very common objection of, no, Yelp is just for restaurants. So like, what can it do for me if I'm not a restaurant? But we do as much as we can to continue demonstrating that's not the case. And I think the businesses who understand that are definitely benefiting from taking advantage of the opportunities that they know are there. And now that that services trend is even more amplified, I think now is the right time to get on board and use that insight to ramp up if you are in the services industry.
Okay. One more question, and that's around reviews. Now, you mentioned how reviews, the language of reviews changed,
Mhm.
with all the words that we have grown to hate over the last year. What about volume? I mean, were people writing more reviews? Were they writing way less reviews? Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I would say there weren't actually like significant changes in review activity that were reported during due to the pandemic. I would say, in fact, like prior to getting some of the official like COVID-19 support features launched on our site,
Mhm.
we saw consumers who were using their review space to actually kind of like crowdsource and let their fellow patrons know the information they were searching for, which is like how businesses were operating, how were they reacting or pivoting to, the different government mandates and restrictions that were going on.
Mhm.
And then we also saw just like a lot of concern from consumers about, what's going to happen to my favorite restaurant? What's going to happen to this business that, is at risk during this time? And I think there's a lot of motivation from kind of a very considerate standpoint from consumers to keep their review activity going so that they can make people aware that, this is a great business, they could use your support, this is what they're doing, in whatever ways they were still offering throughout the past year. So while there might have been a downtick in like people just are going to these businesses less, so they have less to say, I think that was overcome by people, just continuing to, share the good word about businesses that they love and they wanted to support during this crazy time.
Okay, actually, there is one final question, and that
Sure.
is, Yelp has a history of some issues with restaurants, being unhappy and that sort of thing. There's the stories have all been out there. Yelp has done a lot during the pandemic to support restaurants, funding and other things. Some of the tools you're talking. How has your relationship with the community changed through the pandemic? Has it made a big difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always been, as a company, very steadfast in the mission, which is, I've repeated it a couple times today, but we just want to connect people to great local businesses, whether that's a restaurant, whether that's another type of business. We just want to make sure people know like who they can, get a service from that's nearby to them. So that hasn't changed. I know, throughout the years, the opinion of us has definitely changed, but I think as much as we can stay consistent with like, this is what we're trying to do, and everything that's out there reflects that mission. People do see that. It's kind of the proof is in the pudding. Like they can see from our actions that we are very committed to them as a local business, to getting them the right customers and supporting them. That they are willing to kind of return that in kind. And there are a lot of different things, like of course, with our different kind of charitable efforts that we made sure to invest in this year for COVID-19 related reasons, for different, cultural reasons. We started, launching more attributes that make it easier to find and support, diverse businesses as those became of interest. All those things, again, like we launch these as we see the need for them. And as we see those making an impact in the community. So the best we can do is stick to our mission and hope that everyone kind of observes that and sees us acting in support of that.
All right, I think that's it. Lizzie, you want to take us out?
Sure, awesome. Well, thank you to Christina, to you too, Charles, and the whole Yelp team. I thought those were great questions and discussion, and just wanted to give another thanks to Yelp for putting together the webinar for us. Just a few more items from Localogy before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, localogy.com. Just navigate to research and resources and drop down to webinars. And as mentioned before, it will be emailed to all attendees as well. Localogy is also excited to share that we have a virtual conference coming up on May 17th, Place Redefined, with speakers from TikTok, Fiverr, MasterCard, Roku, and many more. To find out more information, please go to resource.localogy.com/place-2021. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to visit localogy.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. I hope everyone has a great day.